loser. Is there a social consequence from this? Yes, and that's why it's called a relative or sometimes a cultural definition of poverty. Be aware, however, that this means of measurement is not the basis of the U.S. poverty line. It is based upon the price of food. Kyle, I'll give you one more chance. You can get one more question in today. Choose wisely, because I need to move on quickly. I gotta get through a lot of stuff. Is this the one you want to take?
How do
Go for
we
it.
decrease the poverty guideline? How do we decrease the line where bottom line is that you're below poverty?
So how do we
like move the line lower instead of increasing the poverty line? How do we make it lower? So
why would you want to do that? Why?
Help people out, I guess.
Why would it help them out? They're still suffering. If you just decrease the poverty line, let's say it's $15,000 a year. You're no longer poor. It just means you no longer have the label, and it will probably mean you will not qualify for some government benefits as a result of no longer being poor, but you still have the same income as you did before. That really doesn't help them at all. What do you think of that? Okay, now, what do you do if you want to do away with poverty to actually move people above that line? That's a different matter. And that goes back to what we're talking about in terms of inequality in America. You could have expanded welfare, you could have work income tax credit, you could have the minimum wage we were talking about previously increased, and that will reduce the number of people in poverty. But that's a different matter. Okay, but I need to move on. So what's the characteristics of Americans living beneath this poverty line? The largest number of poor people in this country, a plurality of them, are what ethnic background, what race? What's their skin color?
White?
Yeah, they're white. That's surprising to a lot of people. Just a little bit less than half of all poor people in the country are white, though our image of poverty is that it is confined to minority communities. African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, in some cases less so Asian Americans. Largest number of poor people in the United States are white. Plurality. Now, what is true is that poverty is less extensive amongst poor people. Just about a little less than half of all poor people are white. But of all white people, only 10% of white people are poor. Yet 1 out of 4 African Americans, Native Americans, and close to these days Latinos as well, are poor. How is it possible only 1 out of 10 white folks are poor, while 1 out of 4 minorities are poor, yet the largest number of poor people are white? How can that be true? There's more white people. I know it doesn't look that way right now in California, and it's true, it's not. California is now a majority minority state. But have you ever been in Iowa? How about Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota? There's a friggin' lot of white people out there. And that's why 10% of a large number tends to be the majority of all poor people. Yet it is also true, racial minorities are disproportionately poor in comparison to white folks. Is that clear? It's a little surprising. The whole thing, it's a little complicated, but surprising to most people, because most people assume all poor people, they're all African Americans or Latino. No. Okay, any questions on that? That makes the good kind of question on the final. Age and poverty. Even to this day, a lot of people still assume that the elderly are the largest group of poor people, and that used to be true. It is no longer true. Actually, the elderly have a lower rate of poverty than the general population. Currently in the United States, about 15% of the entire population lives beneath that poverty line, defined on the basis of the price of food. Basically. About 15% of the American population currently is below the poverty line. But look, only about 9% of the elderly are poor. What group is most impoverished, though, by age? And this is a tragedy. This is a major criticism of this country, quite frankly. Because what age group is most likely to be in poverty in this country? Children. And the younger the child, the greater the risk of being in a poor family. And that's the tragedy. We have the greatest percentage of our population of young people in poverty than any other country in the industrialized world. I know how you feel about their parents. If you're a good American, we hate those welfare folks. But what about the kids? 1 out of 5 children under 18 are poor. Yet 1 out of 4 under 6 are poor. Childhood. How come the elderly have the lowest rate of poverty, yet children have the highest? It's really very simple. Give me the exact number of children under 18 who vote. Very good. It's 0.
You can't vote.
Yeah, they can't vote. And that means they don't have power. Power. The elderly vote. What keeps the elderly out of poverty? 2 words and 2 words alone. What are they? Social Security. If Social Security were to disappear tomorrow, what percentage of the elderly would be in poverty? Over half. Yeah, over half. One program and one program alone has kept the elderly out of poverty. And that's the good news. People often say poverty is inevitable, we can't do anything about it. That's not true. You want to talk about something to be done about poverty? We know how to do it. We've done a dramatic ability to reduce poverty amongst the elderly by a government program called Social Security. It pays a significant income to the elderly and keeps a large number of them out of poverty. Sweden is also, but we know these are called universalistic programs. The most effective way to reduce poverty, and it's surprising, is not to target the poorest people for government benefits. Now that would seem to make economic sense. Listen, no one wants to pay taxes. If we're going to pay taxes, let's at least target the money to the people who are most vulnerable. I mean, that would make good economic sense. The problem when you do that is that when you give money to poor people, I just talked about, do they vote? No, they don't. And therefore, poor people's programs are going to be poor programs. They're not going to be funded. Anytime there's a problem, it's going to get cut back. You ask the average American in poll data, where does the majority of your tax dollars go? You know what they're going to say? Welfare, the military, and foreign aid. Only one of those is any serious percentage of federal spending. What is it? Military. Welfare, that is the classic welfare, we'll talk about in just a second, it's about 1 to 2% of federal spending. 1 to 2% of the classic program. Most Americans consider welfare. Now, if you call Social Security welfare, now you're talking big bucks. But Social Security, does it go just to poor people? Oh no. Who eventually will qualify for for Social Security if you live long enough?
Anyone over 60?
Anybody over 65. In other words, almost everybody. And when everybody's got skin in the game, does that make it a popular program that people will vote to continue to support? According to polling, are most Americans in favor of Social Security? Yes. Would most Americans like to expand Social Security and make the benefits even more rich for the recipients? Yes, they would. How come? Because almost everybody's going to get it. That's why I have Sweden down. People talk about the United States and its big welfare state. That's a joke. Anybody who knows comparative stuff knows that's ridiculous. We have the chintziest welfare state of any country in the industrialized world as a proportion of our gross domestic product and as its impact on poor people. Now, if you really want to see a big welfare state, go to Sweden, Denmark, Norway, the Scandinavian social democracies. Now, in Sweden, who gets welfare? The elderly? Yeah. Children? Yeah. But who else? Everybody. Who gets medical care covered for everybody in Sweden? Everybody. Who gets free college tuition in Sweden? For everybody. Who gets government subsidies? Who gets free daycare for kids? Who gets housing subsidies? Who gets transportation subsidies? Everybody. What's the cost of that? Big taxes. Really high taxes. But Sweden's a democracy. They can cut their taxes. They just could elect people like that. But they don't. They like it that way. They vote it in. How come? Because everybody gets it, just like Social Security. And what that makes for is a popular and therefore politically powerful program. The minute you target your benefits to really the most needy, they don't vote. Power. Power is what you need to vote, which is why it also affects you guys. During the Great Recession, did we touch $1 of Social Security spending for the elderly? No, because they vote. What did we cut?
Education.
Education. Because you guys, that makes no rational sense. We're talking about what makes rational sense. Grandma and Grandpa are going to be dead in a couple of years. They're the past. We shouldn't be giving them any kind of money. Screw them. Go away and die. But you guys are the future. Do we really need you guys well educated to have a dynamic, growing, technically efficient economy? Yeah, we do. Yet we cut your education benefits that didn't touch Grandma and Grandpa. One more time, how come?
Power.
Power, because you guys don't vote. How come you don't? Dude, no, you're kind of naive. It's very cute. You guys are all very cute, but you're kind of naive. And you're kind of, how come you don't do it? I mean, going out and voting just takes about 5 minutes. You punch the poll, or you just put a little letter, you stick it in the mailbox. How come you don't do it? Because you are too busy doing each other. You know, you're in peak reproductive years. All he's thinking about, oh, she's really looking hot, dude. Vote? Forget it. I'm gonna hit on her. That's it. It's that kind of unimportance of voting. And if you don't vote, do politicians care one iota about you? No matter how rational it may be to target our spending on education for the future of this country, screw you if you don't vote. Power, power, power. All right. How much time do people spend poor? Surprisingly, not very long. Yeah, I know about people born into poverty, but 2/3 of all people who will ever experience poverty will do so for less than 3 years, measured longitudinally. And that's an important qualification. Longitudinally means measured over a long period of time, in this case 10 years. That is going to count up anybody who's been poor during a 10-year period and ask them how long they've been poor, but 2/3 of anybody who's ever going to experience poverty have done so for less than 3 years. What's going on? It's working class people who fall temporarily into poverty. What are the events that increase your risk of going into poverty? One, a recession. We just gone through the worst recession since the Great Depression. These tend to from peak to peak about 10 years. Boom, boom, recession, recession, peak to peak or trough to trough about 10 years, which means when you get a recession, does the number of poor people inevitably go up? Yes. But inevitably, do those people come out of poverty because the economy recovers? Yeah. And that's about 5 years. Well, 3 to 5 years, which is about the length of time people spend in poverty. 2, another event predicting why people fall into poverty. Illness or injury. A friend of mine, a carpenter, up on a 15-foot ladder, fell off and blew out his leg. He didn't land on his leg, not his head, it would have killed him. And for 3 years, he couldn't work. Yeah, the first year he got workers' comp, but after that, he got nothing. And was his family poor for a couple of years as a result of that? Yes. What's another event that increases your risk of being poor?
Family.
Birth of a child or divorce. Out of wedlock childbirth, and she's working minimum wage, now she's poor. Or most commonly,